interested in that much anyway. So, so I'll get started. So, welcome to Peter White Public Library. Oh, here we go. Ann Fisher's here. Awesome. Welcome to Peter White Public Library. My name's Marty Ackitts, and I'm the Adult Programming Coordinator for the library. And tonight, it's my joy to introduce art historian Ellen Longsworth for this evening's Artists and Their Art. And tonight's focus is going to be the Hudson River School. Before I get into talking about Ellen and that, I'd like to just highlight a couple things that are going to be coming up in the next week or so here at the library. Tomorrow, God help me, is Douse the Poet. That's part of Art Week, where I will, myself and my friend Janine Rastel, another poet, is going to be down in the Phil Nemisto Pocket Park. Basic from 3 to 5, I could lie about the time, so this wouldn't happen to me, but from 3 to 5, we're going to be sitting at a table, and you can come up, give us a topic, and we'll give you a poem in 10 minutes. If we don't give you a poem in 10 minutes, we have a whole bucket full of water balloons, and people are allowed to douse us with those water balloons if we don't. So the incentive to write a poem is very strong in us tomorrow. But that's Douse the Poet tomorrow from 3 to 5 p.m. at the Phil Nemisto Pocket Park. Next Monday, we have a concert on the steps with Chris Bathgate, a really wonderful musician from downstate. He's going to be performing from 7 to 8 p.m. on the Front Street steps here at the library. Next Tuesday is Blues Day Tuesday with Eddie and the Bluesers. And that is going to be again from 7 to 8 p.m. on the Front Street steps. And then next Wednesday, we have a really interesting presentation. It's a travel presentation called Wandering Through the Land of the Thunder Dragon. And it's a retired professor from Northern, John Frick, who's going to be talking about the Kingdom of Bhutan from 7 to 8 p.m. So that should be really, really fascinating. He's sent me all these beautiful pictures of his travels through Bhutan, and I can't wait to hear his presentation. And then for the week of the first week of July, we have on July 5th, we have a docu-cinema, which is called The Trail of Tears. It's an award-winning documentary about the effects of the Andrew Jackson's Indian Removal Act on the Cherokee Nation. And that's going to be on Tuesday, the 5th at, I believe, 6:30 p.m. here at the library in the community room. And then all kinds of other stuff coming up. I think that there's another concert on the 6th. Oh, no, on the 6th. Okay, let me talk about this one too. See, people aren't going to be that interested, but on the 6th, we have an author's reading virtually, and it's going to be Jonathan Johnson and Greg Ormson, both poets, and they're going to be doing a reading from their books. Greg just released a book called Yoga Song, and the reading is going to be focused on the theme of health and wellness. Jonathan is going to be coming to us from Bali. So I guess that's the perfect place to talk about health and wellness if you're going to do that. So anyway, so that's what we have upcoming this in the next couple of weeks here at the library. But right now it is Art Week in the city of Marquette, and I can't think of a better way to celebrate Art Week at Peter White Public Library than by this presentation by Ellen. Last month, she talked about one of my favorite artists, Andrew Wyeth. In fact, I think when Ellen and I first met and started talking about this series, this programming series, coming up with this idea, I think one of the first artists I mentioned was Andrew Wyeth, because he's one of my favorites. And her program last month, which I have rewatched like twice, Ellen. So, you know, it's bingeable. That's what I'll say. It's bingeable. I've watched it twice, and it's just only deepened my appreciation for Andrew Wyeth's work. And that for me is the greatest pleasure that I've experienced in listening to these presentations and watching these presentations with Ellen. She's passionate and knowledgeable about her subject. And, you know, that passion and knowledge is really apparent when she's speaking about her subject. And to share in her passion and is one of the greatest gifts of these presentations. And also every once in a while getting together with a beer with her and John is another really great gift of these presentations as well. So I'll tell you a little bit about Ellen. She attended Mount Holyoke College and graduated in 1971. She spent her junior year at Amherst College. As a studio art and art history major, she took several art history courses at Amherst, including one that introduced her to the work of Thomas Cole and the development of the 19th century landscape painting in America. Ellen went on to graduate school at the University of Chicago and Boston University, where her focus was the Italian Renaissance sculpture and painting. And we're going to eventually have her do some presentations on that as well. She began teaching as an adjunct English writing instructor while finishing her master's thesis. So that's like slave labor for those of you that don't know that. 10 years later, she was hired by Merrimack College, where she was the only full-time art historian, and for 9 years served as chair of the Fine Arts Department, from which she retired from teaching in June of 2021. So please join me in welcoming to Peter White Public Library my really great friend, Ellen Longsworth.
Thank you very much, Peter. So let me share my screen here. There we go. First of all, let me, in a few words, define what is meant by the Hudson River School. When this term was coined in the latter years of the 19th century here in the States, it was disparagingly meant because of the popularity of a French school called the Barbizon School, which had rather taken over the scene here in the United States. Nevertheless, it has come to designate, I won't say define, but designate a number of artists, beginning with Thomas Cole, who created the first truly American expression in the art world, a particular type of landscape which was grounded on the belief, not held only by the artists, but by many here in the United States, that God was present not only as the creator, but as the, you could say, overseer and expressive agent, let's say, of our landscape, as wild as it was once upon a time. And this is what Thomas Cole, who was an immigrant, who loved about the wilderness that he came to know here on the East Coast. Well, that's where I am. He never got as far as what we know of as Michigan or the UP by any means. Let me just share someone else's words with you here by way of wrapping this up. The Hudson River School landscapes are characterized by the realistic, detailed, and sometimes idealized portrayal of nature. Here, let me give you something to look at while I read. Often juxtaposing peaceful agriculture and remaining wilderness, fast disappearing from the Hudson Valley, just as it was coming to be appreciated for its qualities of ruggedness and sublimity. In general, the Hudson River School artists believed that nature in the form of American landscape was an ineffable manifestation of God. As one transcendentalist poet put it, the oversoul. The oversoul was manifested in this landscape of ours. Now, I'm taking it for granted that many of you have perhaps the understanding that landscape as a subject for art has existed for a very long time. And so this is simply another manifestation of landscape as subject matter. And we'll get back to the oxbow here As I said, just giving you something to look at while I define the Hudson River School briefly. In any event, back to the latter point, that's simply not the case. And so let me give you a brief overview of the history of the use of landscape in the Western tradition. This is an excellent example of the Romans' incorporation of landscape, somewhat fanciful, as you can see from the rock formations, as part of a narrative, as you can read from the title, which illustrates for a wealthy family once upon a time, the tale of Odysseus. So we have figures within landscape, but the landscape is not the subject matter. It's the backdrop. One of my favorites, and absolutely without peer, is this room in a villa which belonged to Livia, as you can read here, who was Augustus Caesar's wife. Now, Augustus Caesar was the first true emperor of Rome after Julius Caesar's assassination. And what you see here is a recreation of a garden, as we understand it, which existed outside that archway. So it's rather like a Frank Lloyd Wright house, in that the interior echoes the exterior and the exterior echoes the interior, as it were. But my point is, this landscape, first of all, is not at all realistic, and second of all, is meant simply decoratively. It's not truly the subject as such, but it's beautiful. Now, moving into the early Christian period, so we move ahead 400 or so years, what artists who were of Roman origin, and of course Christianity thrived in classical Rome, these artists called upon Roman models for their figures and for the other elements of their images, such as this, Christ in a garden. And you can perhaps say, well, maybe this mosaicist knew Livia's garden, probably didn't, but something like it, and created this garden. But now we're into another realm. And this is a realm that landscape will exist in for hundreds of years. It is symbolic. This has nothing to do with earthly pleasures, an earthly garden. This is paradise, because here we have Christ sitting with his followers. It is paradise. So landscape as symbol, simply put. Giotto di Bondone, again moving ahead a few hundred years, employed landscape as backdrop, and sometimes symbolically, but here, this ridge, this rocky ridge, is being used compositionally to point toward the dead Christ. And it's an extraordinary composition that I'm not going to go into here, but because of its off-centered nature. But here, landscape is being used as a dramatic compositional element. It's not symbol. It's simply used as a way of guiding our attention to what is most important. So that's another way in which landscape has been employed, not for itself as such. This is an extraordinary example which contradicts everything I've just said. This is a fresco on the upper wall of a large public palace, as it were, the Palazzo Pubblico, a government center in Siena. And standing in front of this landscape here, which is a landscape which is symbolic because of its beauty and its peacefulness, and all kinds of useful things going on here in terms of farming and tending to animals and so forth. It represents symbolically good government in this place where the government agents of the medieval town of Siena would congregate, and why this contradicts what I've said before is because there's another layer here. Standing in front of this fresco, which I have done, and looking out here to the right, there's an open arch, and out that arch is this very landscape. Siena, if you're not familiar with this Tuscan town, is built on numerous hills, and the Palazzo Publico is one of the major structures, which is on a high point, and looking out that window, you see this landscape. So my point is, this is a realistic landscape that Ambrogio Lorenzetti has painted, but for symbolic purposes. So, and a couple more here. The way in which landscape comes to be used largely in the Renaissance, where we are here with Pollaiuolo's Hercules and the Hydra, is also symbolically, but often with a particular focus, not just on paradise or something of that sort. Now, Hercules, who was slaying this Hydra, one of his 12 labors, as you probably know, was one of the figures, along with the Virgin Mary and John the Baptist, interestingly enough, who was considered a kind of embodiment of the certain ideals of the Florentine Republic, and maybe because of his daring do. But in any event, in the background here, you see this winding river and what looks like an expansive cityscape here. That's Florence. So the point here is the landscape, although it looks highly naturalistic and amounts to nothing more than that, is part of the symbolic meaning of the entirety of this picture. Okay, so that's another way that landscape comes to be used symbolically to, you could say, to shore up a certain entities like the Florentine Republic's sense of itself in an important painting like this, if that's making any sense. There are exceptions, and these next two slides are absolute exceptions to the use of landscape, the creation of landscape simply as symbol, or the use of landscape for purposes other than itself. As you can see, this is a drawing by Leonardo. This is a sketch of the Arno Valley. He's positioned himself somewhere up here on one of the hills overlooking the valley. The Arno Valley, I'm sorry, that is the Arno River on which Florence is situated. And Leonardo lived in Florence for not all of his life, but a good part of his life, especially his early life, during which time he would have sketched this. So this is a portrait of the landscape. And I don't know if you can appreciate this or not up here. I mean, but this is Leonardo at his very best, even though he's very young. He was born in 1452. So what is he, scarcely in his 20s? But these trees are sketched as if they are being moved by the wind, back and forth and back and forth and back and forth. In any event, he's capturing elements of the landscape of and for itself. Okay. And then there is this absolutely exquisite drawing, watercolor, as you can see, by a northerner, Albrecht Durer. And it has been examined by botanists to the extent that every single weed here, because these aren't, fancy flowers, they're dandelions and whatnot. I don't know what they are. I'm not a botanist, but every single growth here has been identified. I've seen this work. It's exquisite. But for Leonardo but for Durer, hardly anybody at this time, late 15th, early 16th century, was at all interested in landscape for itself, with a major exception. In 1453, the Turks, which had been vying for control over the, could say the eastern portion of the Mediterranean that we call Turkey and so forth today, took Constantinople, which was the capital city of, again, what we call Turkey today. And it became the city of Istanbul. Why is that important? What does that have to do with landscape? Well, the Venetians had been trading for a few hundred years eastward through Constantinople, all the way to China, receiving goods also from the far, far east to trade then with European interests. And although they managed to gather themselves together and create another trading system, the fact that their major trading partner, Constantinople, was for a time not a viable source of trade of commerce, caused wealthy Venetians to buy land outside of watery Venice and start farming. Now, interestingly enough, what this meant for Venetian painting was a new emphasis on landscape, because the land, you see, not the water, but the land became a very important, viable, commercial element. And what the Venetians do, beginning with the artist who created this very famous little work, beginning with Giorgione and moving through Titian and onwards, was they created a new type of painting which emphasized landscape. Landscape isn't necessarily the subject as such, but landscape gets its due the way it had never before. Now, this painting is called the Tempest because of the emphasis on the storm. We don't know if Giorgione would have titled the work The Tempest. That's a modern appellation, but nevertheless, the storm takes precedent here. And by the way, this is the very first time that lightning was represented naturalistically and not like a zigzag pattern. There are other layers of meaning here that I won't go into, but anyway, this is the beginning of the interest in landscape of and for itself. Now, I thought you might be interested in this by way of contrast. I couldn't leave Michelangelo out of this. So basically at the same time that Giorgione is painting that work, just a few years later, Michelangelo is creating this work for the Sistine Chapel ceiling. And I want you to notice, this is the Garden of Eden. And I hope you're smiling, because this is the starkest representation of the Garden of Eden you'll ever see. A few rocks, a dead bit of wood here, stump. Yes, there's a flowering tree here, but otherwise nothing. So not everyone was interested in landscape as subject, as the Venetians were. Now, we're getting to the Hudson River School now. Okay. Annibale Carracci was responsible for introducing into the world of art a particular type of landscape called the classical landscape. Here's an artist who, although there is classical subject matter, the flight into Egypt, Mary and the baby, and Joseph and the donkey, fleeing to Egypt to get away from Herod's hordes. This landscape is organized in, just watch my cursor here, in layers. Seems pretty simple-minded. but it's the first time that anyone has taken the interest in creating a landscape which is organized in a particular manner, which gives precedence, for instance, in the foreground to these trees, which help frame the view beyond, and which take you layer by layer by layer by layer from foreground to middle ground to background into a far distant vista, classical landscape, probably so called by later art historians because it's so precisely organized. And then following Annibale Carracci was Nicolas Poussin, whose emphasis on landscape and his influence as an artist overall cannot be exaggerated. But in any event, here is one of his classical landscapes. Here is St. John, who's writing Revelations, and you can see that the landscape is organized in this very same way. And don't forget the classical ruins, that's important too. Now, more importantly, another artist of this century working in France alongside, not so much Annibale Carracci, he's Italian and he's younger, but alongside Poussin is Claude Lorrain. And we who love Claude just simply call him by his first name. So I'll be calling him Claude. And he's known for compositions such as this, which frame either here buildings, ship, you'll see another iteration of this kind of framing coming up, but frame a distant light source. This will lead to a particular development in the United States among these so-called Hudson River School painters called luminism, but we're not there yet. But the point is, what you have here is a focus that you are given, not only because of the way in which the composition is composed on either side of this light source, but because of the light source itself, you are drawn in time and time again, as you'll see in Hudson River School paintings, you are drawn in by this light source. And for Thomas Cole, for instance, he says about the sky, let me find his quote specifically. The sky is the soul of all scenery. In it are the fountains of light and shade and color. And it begins here with Claude Lorrain, because these artists knew, these older artists, they traveled to Europe. Most of them did. And so this is not just like a secondary kind of reference, but primary to what you're going to see regarding the Hudson River School artists. And another work by Claude, much later in his life, he continues the same compositional setup. Here, the distant light framed by architecture and then trees. This idea of these verdant trees helping to frame the distant view becomes one of the primary elements of Hudson River School landscape. And two more artists. The sound of water escaping from mill dams, willows, old rotten bays, slimy posts, and brickwork. I love such things. As long as I do paint, I shall never cease to paint such places. They have always been my delight. I should paint my own places best. Painting is but another word for feeling. Now, John Constable was an English artist, and he also was one of the major influences on American 19th century landscape artists. And I included this quote because what he's saying is, as you can read for yourselves, I paint what I know, and I love painting these places over and over and over again because I love these places. I paint my own places best. And here's one of his more famous works, the Hay Wain. This is painted, there's a narrative to it that I won't take time to go into, but this was painted by Constable in his early career, and he is painting a section of where he grew up, what he knew best, and he's turning it into a narrative, a kind of narrative of farm work and so forth. Anyway, then finally there is Joseph Millord William Turner. Now, thinking about Thomas Cole, he would not have known this painting. Some of you probably do if you've been out here in the Boston area and gone to the MFA. It's one of their treasures. The date is too late for Cole. He died before 1840. But the point is, the color, if not the brushwork of Turner, was instrumental in the work of many of these Hudson River School artists. Now, in terms of Cole, we know he knew this painting, and you'll see it again in the talk that I have coming up regarding the Hudson River School artists themselves. Any questions or comments about this introduction? The lights and shadows of this life are like the lights and shadows in your own pictures. The one makes the other more beautiful. And I thought that was very beautiful. Imagine having your sister write something like that about something that you did. Asher B. Durand is an artist we will treat in his own right. He was an older artist, but he came under the influence of Thomas Cole. And here he's presented us with a very handsome painting of Cole, who became truly his mentor as well as very good friend. Now, I want to read you something that Cole wrote. He not only was a prolific artist, but he wrote about art as well. American scenery is a subject that to every American ought to be of surpassing interest. For whether he beholds the Hudson mingling waters with the Atlantic, explores the central wilds of this vast continent, or stands on the margin of the distant Oregon, he is still in the midst of American scenery. In his own land, its beauty, its magnificence, its sublimity, all are his. And how undeserving of such a birthright, if he can turn toward it in it with an unobserving eye and unaffected heart. Let me tell you a little bit about Cole in terms of his biography. Not much. I hope I won't bore you with too many dates here, but he with his parents came to the United States in 1818. He was 17 years old. He was born in Bolton, Lancashire in 1801. Bolton, Lancashire was, I think maybe still is, an industrial city. And where the family moved, first of all, was Steubenville, Ohio, and then lived in Philadelphia and Pittsburgh, and finally in New York, as in New York City in 1824-25. And that's where, for a time, Cole spends some of his years. But the contrast between where he came from and what he saw here in these United States was life-changing for him. We understand that when he was a kid, he and his sister Sarah, whose quote I shared with you, used to walk around and walk around, look at nature, where they were growing up and so on and so forth. So it's not that nature was a subject for him that was new, but he'd never seen anything like he saw here. In 1825, Cole traveled to the upper Hudson River, to the Catskills, and he created 3 paintings, which were exhibited subsequently in the window of a bookshop in New York City. And they were little paintings, and these little paintings were purchased by Colonel John Trumbull, an artist in his own right, as well as a military hero, William Dunlop, and Asher B. Durand. Another figure whose name you might be familiar with, who more or less immediately came in contact with Cole's work as well, was Daniel Wadsworth, as in the founder of the Wadsworth Atheneum, and a friend subsequently of Cole's as well. And by the way, the Atheneum has the largest number of Cole's paintings of any collection in the States. So he became pretty well known early on, and he was elected a founding member of the National Academy of Design in New York. Now, think of this. He's in his early 20s, and he's an immigrant. And he's not only elected a founding member of this prestigious new society, but he was nominated by Samuel F.B. Morse. So I find that just really quite wonderful. A couple of other dates, and then we'll move ahead. In 1829 to 31, he traveled to Europe, and we'll get back to that in a moment. But my point is, he did not just travel around the northeastern portion of these United States, but also back to his origins, and as in England, of course, and also to Italy, as we'll see, and France. Emerson was one of the sources which in literature expressed the same kind of aesthetic as Cole did and other artists after him did in having praise for our beautiful scenery. So never lose an opportunity of seeing anything beautiful, for beauty is God's handwriting. God is in nature. The oversoul is expressed through nature. Apart from those 3 little paintings, this is one of Cole's first larger paintings. And I'm showing you this work, not only because if you travel out here, you can go to the Museum of Fine Arts and see it, but also because it contains elements that you see time and time again in his work. First of all, you must understand that his paintings are composites. That doesn't mean they aren't truthful, but that means that he has created sketches, and I'll show you some of those coming up. He's created sketches working out of doors, and he's putting together these paintings in his studio, first in New York and later in the Catskills. And so there's a certain formula to these paintings, and I don't mean that badly at all. In any event, what we see here is in the foreground what we call a blasted tree and a blasted tree trunk. Maybe they've been hit by lightning, maybe they're just old, but they are hallmarks of Thomas Cole's paintings. And very often, as here, they introduce, you see, like Claude Lorrain's trees, for instance, in the second example I showed you, they introduce, as it were, the rest of the painting. And so we look beyond here to the Hudson River and to the sublimity of the sky. Something else that Thomas Cole said, and here it's about water, wrote, I should say, "I will now write of another component of scenery without which every landscape is defective. It is water. It is a most expressive feature. In the unrippled lake or river, which mirrors all surrounding objects, we have the expression of tranquility and peace. And that's what we have here." This is a work a little later on, blasted tree in the foreground, you see. Very realistically painted. And as you'll see, based upon sketches that he made, I'll show you one in particular, which I enjoy enormously. But I'm showing you this work, not only because it's yet another view of what he knew best, not only New York State, but also, Maine and New Hampshire, but because there is this Native American here rowing a canoe. There are exceptions, but in Thomas Cole's paintings, where human beings are involved, it is a Native American person. As I said, there are exceptions, because it was understood that these people not only were here first, but they embodied and represented the wilderness, the untamed wilderness that in this painting surrounds this figure. So they become part and parcel of the understanding of the significance of untamed wilderness. What is ironic, but not surprising, is by the time Thomas Cole is creating images such as this, mankind has begun to civilize, as it were, to tame such places as this. Now, the next two works I have chosen for you because they represent, I think, two of the most significant statements Cole ever made. And they have to do with religion, with God and nature. And he makes it quite clear that this is his object, as it were, in his painting. So let me read this to you. It was on Mount Horeb that Elijah witnessed the mighty wind, the earthquake, and the fire, and heard the still small voice. That voice is yet heard among the mountains. St. John preached in the desert. The wilderness is yet a fitting place to speak to God. And earlier, a few years earlier, he created this painting of John in the wilderness, arms spread out in front of a cross, and anachronistically, but nevertheless, the wilderness is being baptized, as it were, in this painting. And then a little bit later in this treatise on American scenery, Cole basically comes back to this idea. Okay. Now, this is really one of my favorites, and I'm going to, I'm just checking the time here, going to mention something else to you that may or may not make sense. I don't know. Nature has spread for us a rich and delightful banquet. Why don't you look at this while I read that? Shall we turn from it? We are still in Eden. The wall that shuts us out of the garden is our own ignorance and folly. May we at times turn from the ordinary pursuits of life to the pure enjoyment of rural nature, which is in the soul like a fountain of cool waters to the wayworn traveler. And this is his painting, as you can see from the title, of the Garden of Eden. And before we go into a couple of the particulars here, I want you to notice the way in which this distant landscape, illumined by this white kind of distillation of pure light, is framed, as in Claude's paintings, by these elements here. He was, as in Thomas Cole, was very interested, as you'll see in the next few slides, in trees. He loved trees. What else is going on here in this absolutely exquisite painting, filled with flora, fauna? Here's a little creature. It looks maybe like it might be a dog, I'm not sure. Here is Adam gesturing to Eve over here someplace, I think. Water, so important to coal, the sky, and so forth. Now, I'm assuming that some of you know Joni Mitchell's song Woodstock. And one of the lines in Woodstock, which is repeated several times, is, "And we must get back to the garden." I find that reference particularly what's interesting is not a good word, but provocative, because it reminds me of Thomas Cole, "We must get back to the garden." And then there is this song that predates Woodstock that I know you all know, that was composed by a woman in the early years of the 20th century. No, I'm sorry, late years of the 19th century, called America the Beautiful. Do you think that that song might in fact mirror what we're looking at here in the words chosen, in the beauty of the tune? I wish I could sing. I might sing it for you, but I won't. But think about that. I don't think the relationships between those two songs and these paintings is at all beyond the pale. And then another Claude Lorrain, just to remind you of the framing elements, okay? Trees, distant light, foreground figures in this case, and so forth, okay? This is a painting that expresses something else about Cole's use of landscape. First of all, here's the Garden of Eden that we just saw. Very, very similar in its details. And here, of course, is the voice of God, angry as he can possibly be, shouting Adam and Eve from the garden. Look at the landscape. Here, Cole is using landscape clearly as an expressive agent. You could say, well, he does so here as well because of the beauty of this place. But the contrast here makes it clearly evident that now Adam and Eve, because of their sin, are entering into a world of landscape, of blasted trees, of horrible rocky crags, and dangerous waterfalls. And also, by the way, a hungry wolf lurking over here. So he's using landscape, you could say symbolically, if you will, expressively. And now to Thomas Cole's interest in trees. This has fascinated me for quite some time. So let me, again, give you something to look at while I read that. Trees are like men, differing widely in character, wild and uncultivated, battling with the elements and with one another for the possession of a morsel of soil or a favoring rock to which they may cling. They exhibit striking peculiarities and sometimes grand originality. He created drawing after drawing after drawing, and many of them, as you'll see here, the ones I've chosen to show you, finished, either ink here or pencil or a combination of drawing media. Clearly indicating not only that he looked at these trees with great care and diligence, but I would say also with an undying love for each and every one of them. And this buttonwood tree, as it is trying to survive here on the bank of a river, leaning over precariously. And then this gnarled trunk of a tree, bit of a tree, is one that you can imagine he used over and over and over again as a model, as it were, for his blasted trees in composition after composition after composition. And then this is a larger sketch, as you can well see, of a lake, which is surrounded largely by dead trees, as it says, Lake of Dead Trees. And this was created in part to facilitate a painting of this place. Here's a term that you might be familiar with or not, en plein air. It means sketching or painting out of doors. And that's what he's doing here, here, and here, and here, and elsewhere. As he made his sketches finished and not so finished as here in the creation of his paintings to come. So here is the Lake of Dead Trees, which I find absolutely stunning. The subject are the trees, the dead trees. Now, let me read this to you. Oh, let's go back to this. You don't need to look at that while I read it. He wrote a poem called The Lament of the Forest, probably in about 1838, and he imagines trees speaking. This is only a very small part of this poem. The axe unresting smote our reverend ranks, and crashing branches lashed the ground. The mighty trunks, the pride of years, rolled on the groaning earth. Our doom is near. Behold, from east to west, the skies are darkened by ascending smoke. Each hill and valley is become an altar under Mammon, and the gods of man's idolatry, the victims we are. This poem consists of 214 lines of blank verse. It's an extraordinary expressive work. I don't know how it would be judged by someone with a literary degree, but 214 lines of verse having to do with the life and death of trees. And at about the same time, maybe a little bit earlier, he created this work, one of his earliest works, as you can see from the date 1825. And here's a figure, axe in hand, chopping up the remains of a tree that he's already felled. Here, this wilderness is already under the command of mankind. And here's a Thomas Cole blasted tree over here, helping to frame this little farmhouse and barn. How are we doing? I have just a handful of minutes left. This is probably one, along with the oxbow, probably one of Thomas Cole's most famous paintings. Kaaterskill Falls is a double falls, and it's the largest, the longest, highest, there we go, falls in New York State. It's 260 feet. And the view that we have here, I think you can see, is from inside the cave that opens out onto the stream into which the falls pour. Cole also, along with having an affection for trees, had a thing about caves and the symbolic nature of caves, at least as he read into caves and his use of caves in his compositions. Now here, this is a natural cave. When I speak to you next, I'll be showing you some paintings that Cole composed, out of his most creative moments, which feature caves, which are used for symbolic purposes. But anyway, back to Kaaterskill Falls. This guest house, and as you can see, viewing platform overlooking the falls, again, as you can see, was open to the public in 1824. As you can see, it's a very, very large complex. It no longer exists, unfortunately, at least for tourists. But here are people out here looking out over the falls, which are right down here. Okay. This is a sketch that Cole made of, here you can see the double falls here. This is what the end of which we saw. Here's the cave, okay, in the painting. And then here's the second fall of water. And you notice he's just sketching in the merest indication of this tourist haven. And then this painting of the Kaaterskill Falls from the other side, from the other end, as it were. And where is that tourist complex? It's not to be beheld. It's not there. What he will do, as he does here, is he will eliminate those elements that do not please him. And that's another aspect of his paintings as complex combinations of views. And also he paints what not only he wants to see, but he wants you to see. The only human being here is a Native American. Again, as the human being who should be in this context, if there is a human being present at all. And also lending scale to the painting. That's another reason, by the way, for these figures. It's not just symbolic by any means, but painterly, as they say, or artistic, as you might say. Now, I want to show you a couple more slides, and then we'll quit here because my watch says 8 o'clock. But I thought you'd like to see one of Cole's pieces of equipment, sketch box that, since it has a view of the, I think that's probably, what would that be? That might be the Parthenon. Anyway, one of the paintings that he created in Italy, as he was there from 1829 to 32, that is in England, Italy, and France. But I think it would be useful to end with these next two paintings. And you saw this at the beginning in the introduction that I prepared for you. He actually met Turner when he was in England, and he saw this painting. And we know that he saw this painting because he created this drawing. And I'm sorry, it's difficult to see. It's difficult to see in any context. But this is the part of a sketchbook of Cole's. And what you're looking at here are his notations, his written notations regarding, the colors that you see here in Turner's painting, okay? And then also you see here, these sketches, something of the contours of the composition that seem to echo one another, that he seems to be, to be interested in. Maybe this and the ship, it's hard to tell exactly. But the point is, he studied this painting with great care. So we know that even though he has established himself in the United States as something of a young marvel, he continues to learn and to study the masters, of which Turner certainly is one. And then finally, back to Constable. And this is another place that Constable knew well, this ruin of Hadley Castle. And this is a painting that Thomas Cole executed sometime after he came back from England, from that trip to England and Italy and France. And he is echoing the cloud formations. It's not exact, but nevertheless, echoing the cloud formations that you see here in Constable's painting, here as realistically as he possibly can. Okay, I think that's probably enough for today. I'll see you in September. Any questions or comments?
Yeah, you can put any question, you can unmute yourself if you have any questions or comments, or you can put them in the chat too. It's up to you. Roberta, did you have, yeah.
Yeah, Ellen, in the art world today, how are the Hudson River artists regarded? And, you know, pricing wise, are their paintings selling? And, you know, how are they selling today compared with, you know, 20, 30 years ago?
Well, unfortunately, Roberta, that's not what I know anything about, to be
Okay.
quite frank. The first part of your question is of particular interest because I was about to give not this lecture, but something similar to a group of retirees a few months ago. And before I started, this woman said, well, you know, I'm not that interested in American landscape, but I'm here just to find out about it. So I think it's a mixed bag. Some people have no interest in landscape whatsoever. And some people do. So I really can't answer to your questions. I'm sorry. So.
One of the things that I noticed in a lot of those landscapes, I mean, so many of them, you have that finger of a river that like threads through like so many of those landscapes. And even like, if you look really closely, like in the mountains, you can almost see like the start of it in the mountains coming down and it ends up in the foreground of the painting. I think that's so fascinating. Yeah.
Yeah, well, that was important to Cole.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
It's a classic design style that a lot of painters used.
Mm.
Which is what, Peter?
Putting a river, it's an easy way to draw a person into the painting, is to use leading lines.
Mm-hmm.
This one right here is a perfect example.
Yeah.
Everything's leading to your eye to the waterfall.
Yeah.
Oh, that's a very good point.
Look at the way the mountains coming down, and everything's thing. It's I hate to say it's design painting 101 is talks about classic design, and that is leading lines is one of their favorite things. That and framing. Yeah. And that's what the cave does, is it frames. Again, the point is to lead to the painting, to the subject matter that the painter wants you to get.
Yeah.
Yeah, and that takes us to Claude, don't you think, Peter?
Mm-hmm.
Claude Lorrain, I mean, it's classic. Yeah, yeah. Interesting.
Oh, yeah. Anne says practically X marks the spot. That's what it is. Yeah. And I noticed that even in the landscapes that you were showing from much earlier, they have those rivers, like, you know, in them that just sort of lead you through it.
Well, this is I think a classic, using word again, classic example. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Hmm.
Wow. Well, you've left us on a cliffhanger, Ellen. We can hardly wait to see what part 2 has for us. Where we're headed. Yeah. See, yeah, even in that one with Hercules, where there was a river that was threading through it. Like right there.
Yeah.
It's just amazing to me. I mean, it just I just noticed it so many times. So
It's
Yeah.
funny, once you see something like that, you just can't get away from it, can you?
Yeah, no,
Yeah.
yeah, every time you went to a new painting, I'm like, oh, there's the river that's going through the landscape. So yeah,
Yeah.
it's really cool. All right.
Well, thank
Well-
you all for being present. Really appreciate it.
Yeah, thank you everybody for coming. Ellen's next presentation is going to be in September. It'll be part 2 of what we just we started this time. It'll be on September 20th, Tuesday, September 20th. So please stay tuned. Come on back. There's lots of great stuff coming up this summer. So please don't be a stranger to Peter White. And goodbye, Mr. Roberta. I saw your hand. So yeah.
Bye, guys. Thanks again. Appreciate it.
All right. Awesome. Thank you, everybody. Oh, you're muted, John.
And it's a good thing.
Okay,
night,
so what
everyone.
did you say?
I don't know. You don't want to know. No, it was nicely done. I'll talk to you in a minute, okay?
Okay, sweetie.
Night, everyone.
Ciao,
Good
ciao.
night.
Good to-
Say hi
good
to,
to
say hi
hear
to
you.
Linda, Peter.
I
Hi,
will.
Roberta. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Ellen. We'll
Hey,
we'll
thank
see
you,
you
Peter.
soon, okay?
Okay. Have a great June. Maybe I'll see you in July.
That sounds great. We'll see you
All
then.
righty. Take
All
care,
right,
Marty.
bye-bye.
Bye.